Syndicate. Thank you for recording, Diana. A lot of syndicates, have come up and have, grown over the past year, right? And, something that I always see is that even a lot more platforms are being created now to then be able to support the work of syndicates. Eunice, if I can start with you. When you think about the role that syndicates play to the African startup ecosystem, especially at the earlier stages, what do you think this role is and how important are they to the ecosystem?
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for having me. I think syndicates
have so much human capital, right, in the fund looking for these deals, but also you want as much diversity as possible from the investments that you do make. So I think syndicates from an institutional perspective are quite interesting in that, A, they provide so then, we're able to tap into syndicates based in Kenya, so we can understand a lot of the nuances, and those nuances would differ to what's happening in West Africa as well. So I think from a deal flow perspective, from just that early support in terms of getting the founders to a stage where they have the right documents, they have the right know-how in terms of how to engage with the fund or an institutional investor. But also the third thing in terms of that due diligence, I think that's how we view them. So it's always a plus whenever a founder has come through a syndicate network, because we know that there's been that upfront work conducted. So I think it's just overall exciting. There is a huge gap at that first check, as has been mentioned. So I do think that the capability that's developing is quite exciting for us, because then founders are a little bit more ready by the time we invest.
No, absolutely. Absolutely, I agree. And I think that it's also one of the things the syndicates also do is they allow non-tech people, like people in other industries with high networks, to be able to then get into tech, because it's an easy way for them to put in small checks, $1,000, $2,000 into tech companies, and then learn how the ecosystem is growing. Kai, let's switch focus a bit and talk a bit about on the VC funding and accelerators bit. And this is interesting because my background for 4 years was on the accelerator bit of things. I used to lead accelerators at CCR. And I know that, compared to the role accelerators used to play 3 or 5 years ago, there are a lot more players now playing similar roles, right? There's a lot more VCs, a lot more syndicates. When you think about the expectations of what the next 1 to 3 years, especially because we're in what I call a lift-off phase in the ecosystem, right? Where there's tremendous growth happening. When you think about the role of VCs and also the role of accelerators over the next 1 to 3 years for the ecosystem, what are your thoughts on that?
So thank you very much, Francis. I'm very happy to be with all of you here today. So thinking about what I expect will be happening in the coming 1 to 3 years, I see that the ecosystem across the entire continent is evolving and developing really fast. And accordingly, I expect that the VCs and accelerators will also be evolving and developing, hopefully as fast as the startups and the founders are developing. I believe that so far what we're noticing everywhere in the continent, from Egypt to Kenya to Nigeria to South Africa to Morocco and everywhere, is that the profiles of the founders are highly changing. They are not the fresh grads anymore, not just the fresh grads anymore, but we're seeing a lot of people in their mid-career who are changing to startups. I was saying that what we're noticing is that the founders' profiles are developing from until recently they were mostly university fresh grads. Now we're seeing different profiles joining, like mid-career professionals or even very senior professionals from consultancy firms, from tech firms, or even like family businesses turning into start. So as those profiles are developing, the requirement that they will have from accelerators and eventually from VCs would be different. They will not need someone to do a lot of hand holding, but they will need someone to be working with them on how to shift their mentality or how to use the business acumen that they have from previous roles to be more suited to a startup profile or a startup nature of doing business. So, and in that same sense, I also, like, my expectation would be that accelerators and VCs would eventually become more specialized. So maybe more targeted towards specific industries, like we're seeing fintech is there and will always be there. Health tech is coming next in line. Agri-tech is always important for our continent. So my expectation is that more and more accelerators and more VCs would be more specialized, more industry focused, or even more tech focused in terms of specific technologies like machine learning, like IoT, like blockchain, and so on.
I absolutely agree with you, Chahir, and I think you make a really important point. It was something I was going to mention about how we've switched, which is a good thing. We're switching from an era where technologists were the one building startups to an era where operators and people with industrial experience are now the one building startups. Exactly. Which is why, you know, something that I switch that has also happened is the products have also gone from being purely technology to combining technology with actual value, because it's no more I have an app. The products are actually working and providing value to their consumers. So ask a question, just Hope, would be, when you think about accelerators versus syndicates, if I was to switch up the question a bit, how do you think about the role that accelerators and syndicates would play in this next phase? Like Chahir has mentioned, do you think they will complement each other? Do you think that's, what are your thoughts on it generally?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it does depend on how an accelerator positions itself, but also the range of expertise that exists within the syndicate to kind of answer your question on whether they complement each other or not. I do imagine a world where they do complement each other. So for example, like Founders Factory Africa has an acceleration component, but the way we structure it, it's from a venture building perspective. So we've built a team of 20 to 25 individuals, all operator focused. So they've had exits in the industry and are really just delivering that know-how and expertise to founders alongside product engineering, growth hacking, partnerships, investments. I think obviously that's the role that I've seen a lot of accelerators across the continent shift towards, to be a lot more hands-on, non-program focused or non-demo day focused, which means that there's a lot of hands-on expertise that is injected into the business to help them solve for some of the challenges. Syndicates, on the other hand, I do think that where I've seen a strong pool in terms of the type of expertise that they have is more on a business development perspective. So, you know, if I work for a big corporate, how can I tap into my corporate network to facilitate certain introductions? So, you know, I do think there's a world where founders can think about how to navigate sort of the balance of skills that are required and leverage both accelerators and syndicates, but just making sure that you manage that cap table quite well. And I guess, yeah. So definitely, I think it can be complementary with a lot of our founders coming into the program. We kind of understand what is the skill set of the existing investors, where are the gaps, and then operationally how we can plug into some of those gaps. And most often it's worked out quite well. So I don't imagine that it will change as founders look to expand to new markets. Think about how do you have a soft landing from a Nigeria to a Kenya, very different markets, right? I do think then there's a space for both.
No, I absolutely agree with you. Absolutely agree with you. Eunice, if I may come back to you, you know, this syndicate. A friend who's an operator at a company hit me up yesterday that, you know, he's starting his own syndicate. We're seeing a lot of founders, you know, starting their own syndicates and also investing actively. What are your thoughts on this development and, you know, the impact on the ecosystem?
Yeah, definitely. Like I mentioned earlier, the growth of syndicate groups on the continent is definitely a win, for all of us. Like I mentioned, a lot of founders who have raised, either, like a pre-seed, seed, or even Series A round are now becoming, like angel investors, some of them even LPs, right? I've actually reached out to quite a few successful, like startup founders that have, raised Series A's and beyond and said, hey, I'm launching a fund and, will you be interested in becoming an LP in my fund? And I've seen that a lot of them are very open to the idea, given that they came from that background and now they're giving back to the community. I'm seeing a lot of even, like startup founders saying, hey, I have investments from the founders at Flutterwave and Paystack, right? Like it's a new thing now. And that is good for the community because a lot of the startup founders that are coming early on can see themselves, like represented, from the ones that, have actually made a success, a name for themselves in the startup ecosystem. So I think it's only good for the community. And I actually hope that, more and more founders, even just like regular professionals, get involved either as angel investor and if they can as potential LPs, because we need more LPs. Like angel investment is it's very risky, right? But when you invest, either in a fund or like a venture studio or like an accelerator program, you're diversifying your portfolio across, many different sort of companies versus just like, putting your bet in one. So yeah, I think we can only go, like high from here.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I have a personal theory that just like in addition to your point that at the pre-seed stage on the continent, some of the countries that would see the best growth at the pre-seed and seed stage are countries where the founders are getting secondaries and getting capital to be able to then reinvest into the ecosystem, because technology founders and technologists would invest in what they know, and what they know is not real estate or oil and gas. They're going to invest in tech, which then creates a flywheel for growth. I have two more questions before our 3 minutes is up. Hope if you could speak very quickly to the role you think startup builds across Nigeria, Senegal, Tunisia, from a regulatory standpoint, the role that is playing in the growth of the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is quite an interesting question because when I got it, I looked at sort of where is Tunisia today, right? So since there was the startup bill, it's quite interesting that now they recognize as the top 5 in MENA region in terms of investment deals. A lot of different startups have launched despite the pandemic, a lot of accelerators and incubators. So I think there's a lot of data points that validate sort of how the startup bill within Tunisia has been quite a good accelerant for growth. I also think there's interesting like ripple effect in terms of how the broader ecosystem grows. So you'll see a lot of talent development sort of organizations. So like, in Nigeria, you have like Andela, but they have Go to Code that really just build world-class engineering and software development talent. And I think that's also a ripple effect of a growing tech ecosystem. The second thing is just that there's better pathways towards founders who want to kind of build for global markets. So InstaDeep is a perfect example. A Tunisian company, headquartered, launched operation now in the EU and significant sort of Series B raises. But at the same time, kind of just to balance the view, right? Nigeria has grown in spite of that type of legal framework. I think, so it's always quite interesting. I think there's no blanket statement, and each country would need to kind of figure out how are the nuances relevant to kind of encouraging that growth within a country. Yeah. Sometimes people can grow in spite of it. In other cases, like Tunisia, they've been able to grow leveraging this infrastructure through the lowering of the barrier towards entering entrepreneurship. So unfortunately, no standard answer. I think it is a little bit nuanced because we've seen 2 different use cases across the continent.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Different strokes for different folks, right? So more or less, close out the conversation, Chahir. When you think about what the next big thing on the continent with regards to VC funding is, in 30 seconds, what comes to mind?
So what comes to mind is blockchain. I think the next big thing will probably be blockchain. Maybe not blockchain as we know it right now. Maybe it's not what we see. Maybe it's something else. We're just scratching the surface. But I believe that the blockchain technology, at least as a concept, can bring a lot of solutions to so many complex African issues and African challenges.
Awesome. Thank you so much for everyone. Thank you so much to all the speakers. Thank you so much to everybody in the room. This was a really exciting conversation in such a short period of time.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. I think we're okay. So we'll keep the conversation going. I'm curious, in the audience, like again, we have VCs and operators and folks, different folks in the audience. Based on the conversation and syndicates and funding, any particular questions or any particular things that you think the speakers should touch on? While we're waiting for that, like my own question, and anybody can take this up, would be that from a standpoint of local capital, right? When you think about local capital, again, because the argument or a conversation that goes around is, yes, raised $5 billion on the continent last year. But if you think about it, a significant chunk of that in terms of actual money, because again, most of that money was from institutional VCs who have LPs, and those LPs in many cases are not based in Africa, are not Africans. They're usually family offices or funds or pension funds or high net worth individuals or fund of funds outside of the continent. How important is it to have local capital? Is it something we should be worried about? Is it something that is going to happen naturally, right? What are your thoughts generally? Anyone could go.
I mean, I have something to say about this. I definitely think that as much as we want, right, a lot of Africans are still a little bit more resistant towards taking risk, especially when it comes to the tech industry. I'm still in the process of raising a $10 million fund, and as much as I hate it, right, like a huge amount, and I would say a little bit over 90%, right, of my capital is still coming from the US. I've had definitely like a few Africans getting involved, but it has been a challenge, right, to convince a lot of like the high net worth individuals that I've met on the continent, or even like family offices, or just different people that you think that might be interested in taking part of this opportunity, to be okay, writing you a $250,000 or $500,000 check size into a VC fund, or even taking a bet from an angel perspective. So we have a lot of conversations about Africans getting more involved in the VC space, but I fear that like 5 years from today, when a lot of the return is being ripped off, the actual local Africans might not be a huge amount of the people getting off those benefits.
No, definitely I agree with you that we need to find ways to bring a lot more capital into the mix. Umar has a couple of questions. Umar, do you want to type the questions, or you want to unmute and ask the questions?
Yeah,
okay. Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you for the great discussion. So a couple of questions. When we say, obviously, from an emotional perspective, I understand and I really value getting more local capital into the system. I think it's noble to do that. But strictly from a venture capital return perspective, or a startup, from the startup's point of view, to be able to get access to capital when they need it, would you say that it actually matters in if we keep those metrics in mind? Maybe I'm missing something. Honest question here. And secondly, if either Hope or Eunice or both can maybe talk a little bit about their ventures or their syndicates, or guide us in terms of how to find more information, I'd be really interested.
Awesome. Thanks, Umar. I have a thought on Umar's first question, but happy for someone to want Kari. You wanna take a stab at it? Can you hear me, Kari?
Francis, I couldn't hear you for a moment. I can hear you now.
Okay, I said, do you want to take a stab at Umar's first question with regards to the importance of local capital? Is this something?
Yeah, actually, I agree. I kind of agree with Omar that from emotional perspective, we see the value of the local investments, but then from venture capitalist perspective, maybe it's not as crucial. However, I think that, like, going back to your question and then reflecting also on Omar's question, I think it's just a matter of time for the local investments or the local investors to be able to see the value of investing in local startups when they see them, like when they see a lot of success stories, when they see exits, when they see unicorns. And for example, like, I'm based out of Cairo, I'm in Egypt, we're starting to notice that. And we can also compare that with the angel investors. Like, most of the angel investors now are local. So I think it's just a matter of time until, I will not say that we'll get most of, like, VCs to be local, but we'll get a bigger portion there. And I think that they could have some sort of added value because they are part of the ecosystem, they are part of the local environment where the startup is. They would have maybe some deeper understanding of what the issues are, and at the same time, participating as LPs, they could be giving some confidence to other international or regional LPs to join.
No, absolutely agree. Absolutely agree with your point. And I think, like, Kyle, you mentioned what I was going to say in response to Umar's point, that if you think about it, the local capital that is available through syndicates, through founders locally today, was made available because of the external capital that came into the ecosystem 5 to 10 years ago. Because by money coming into, Paystack and Flutterwaves, someone like Shola was probably able to get a couple $1 million that is now reinvesting into the ecosystem. Early employees at these companies are also able to get some more money that they're now reinvesting into the ecosystem. So definitely, I agree that it's not a huge, factor. But I also think that it means that if we're able to unlock, a lot more local capital, it just means that the abundance of capital is, a lot more. And it also potentially can give international investors more confidence as well when they know that the local, people who are wealthy on the ground are also investing in technology as well. We might not have enough time to go into, to have Eunice and Hope talk through, your companies. If you could please just put it in the chat box, either your contact details, your LinkedIn, such that Omar or any other person on the call who wants to, reach out and either become an LP or, collaborate, could do so.